Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're doing amazing. The Great Illyrian Revolt. We are continuing the Augustus train here. We have a couple more stops. We have, of course, this video, which we're going to talk about. I guess you're going to imagine the coast of Bosnia-Herzegovina, butchered that last part, and Croatia, otherwise known as Dalmatia, Pannonia, those types of areas. Under revolt. What? So let's hear it. Glad you're here. I'm Shields. This is what we do.
Throughout its grand conquests across the Mediterranean, the Romans subjugated many proud and martial peoples.
Yes.
Among these, the fearsome Gauls and relentless Germanic tribes are often discussed, but other equally formidable peoples are overlooked. Across the Adriatic Sea from Italy, another ancient people had made their home in the mountainous regions of the Western Balkans. Rich in resources and agriculturally productive, the land of Illyria was heavily exploited by the Romans, and its stubborn, untamable people were now being forced into a foreign war in Germania.
And wasn't a lot of this territory kind of like secured before the what was it? Before the huge battle between Antony and Octavian? What wasn't Agrippa and Octavian the people who? Yeah, wasn't that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Upon gathering their forces, the Dalmatians realized how great a number they were, and years of discontent boiled over into the most significant threat Rome had faced in decades, the Great Illyrian Revolt.
Yeah, some people are saying this is the greatest threat to Roman sovereignty since Hannibal.
Every week, we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific Succession and Kings and YouTube continues known to the Romans job. By the time of Augustus, Illyria was known to the Romans as an ancient land of barbarians who came into conflict with the Greeks and Macedonians centuries prior, conquered famously by Philip II of Macedon. The region was rich in its resources, including extensive silver and gold mines, iron, timber, and fertile agricultural plains nestled in between its mountainous peaks. To the Romans, there were 2 distinct groupings of Illyrian peoples, the Dalmatae along the coast and extending well up into the mountainous regions of southern Illyricum, and the Pannonii in parts of Noricum, Pannonia, and throughout northern Illyricum.
So it goes deep, actually. Yeah, so wow.
Along with these 2 major groups, other peoples, like the Venetic tribes, and various western Moesian or Thracian peoples also intermingled into the region. The Romans had already dealt with the Illyrians before, throughout multiple Pannonii revolts, the most recent of which having occurred between 14 and 10 BCE during the time of Drusus's campaigns, although
Okay, so I forgot about that one.
little is known of this prior conflict. The causes behind the outbreak of the Illyrian War are uncertain, as it is recorded in Roman sources as having been quite spontaneous. The primary sources for this revolt, Velleius Paterculus and Cassius Dio, have only limited information to offer about its origin. They state that Marcus Valerius Messala Messallinus, the proconsul of Illyricum, left the region with the majority of the Roman legionary forces in the province to join Tiberius on the Danube. He had ordered the conscription of the Dalmatians and Pannonians, who met at a place near the city of Sirmium, although the precise meeting point is unknown. There, a local war leader named Bato of the tribe of the Decidiates stepped out before the multitude of conscripts and auxiliaries and stirred them to revolt, claiming that the greatness of their multitude was proof that the Romans could be easily overcome.
So many people have said that. I guess they don't have history books, do they? But so many people have been just like them. I mean, it depends on what you think, how you think about things. There's definitely been, some victories by quote-unquote barbarians in the past. But when you look at the scoreboard, it just does not favor you.
The root of this dissatisfaction with Roman rule is somewhat unclear. Bato's own history is relatively unknown, and Messallinus had believed the province relatively safe and at low risk of any form of revolt when he set out for the Danube. A few theories have been put forward by modern historians, including the heavy levying of grain and other material goods to alleviate famines and recent natural disaster in Italy, and the significant increase in tax burden to supply the new Aerarium Militare, the recent centralized treasury fund to pay the Roman army on a permanent basis and standard interval. In any case, it is clear the fundamentally extractionist nature of Roman imperialism was to blame. The revolt quickly swelled as Bato's rebels were joined by the tribe of the Bruci, allegedly reaching 200,000 armed warriors out of a total of 800,000 tribesmen.
That's a ton.
While these numbers were clearly inflated, the severity of the threat was not
I should have known.
to be understated. Bato split his forces, moving south to Salona, where he laid siege to the city. However, he was struck by a stone ball hurled from a ballista, wounding him and forcing the besieging rebels to scatter. Retreating from Salona, they wreaked havoc along the coast as they advanced southeast towards Apollonia, again encountering the Romans and defeating them in a seemingly Pyrrhic victory. Another force was sent to attack Italy over the low and easily surmountable passes of the Julian Alps, striking fear into Rome itself. Augustus called for emergency measures, raising the veterans settled in military colonies and levying the economic power of the equites and senators.
So I don't even know if this is just an absolute force by Augustus, or is this genuinely a threat? The down the coast of Dalmatia, it feels like they're just, not gonna have enough amongst themselves to really do anything. I just don't know.
The Romans responded quickly, with their Thracian allies having already entered the field against the easternmost Illyrian peoples under their king Rhoemetalces. Quickly, the governor of Macedonia, Aulus Caecinus Severus, caught up to them with 4 legions, approaching the Dalmatae for an engagement at the river Dreva. The marshy terrain gave the advantage to the defending Dalmatae, and the Romans were repulsed on the first day of the battle before the...
Hold on. I gotta back up because we got Thracia, we got Macedonia. I need to figure out who's on whose side.
...colonies, and levying the economic power of the equites and senators. The Romans responded quickly, with their Thracian allies having already entered the field against the easternmost Illyrian peoples under their king Rhoemetalces.
Okay, so Thracians, allies.
Quickly, the governor of Macedonia, Aulus Caecinus Severus,
Okay, so the governor of Macedonia. Okay, it makes sense now.
caught up to them with 4 legions, approaching the Dalmatae for an engagement at the river Dreva.
Makes sense.
The marshy terrain gave the advantage to the defending Dalmatae, and the Romans were repulsed on the first day of the battle before the arrival of their Thracian allies. With Rhoemetalces' help, the Romans defeated Bato and drove them deeper into the mountains of Illyria, but with significant losses. Severus, however, was forced to abandon his pursuit of the rebels as word reached him of invasion on the lower Danube, where the Dacian Sarmatians had decided to take advantage of the Roman military's sudden vacancy in the region, and with Severus's withdrawal, only Roman forces bottled up at Salona were left in the region. Tiberius's campaign against the Marcomanni and Marbodus had stalled, but with the matter unresolved, he had hesitated to redirect his army against the rebellion, having grown more cautious with age.
So, you basically have the stuff going on in Germania, which is actually pulling resources away.
However, the stalemate on the frontier gave way to a truce, as the Romans agreed to a treaty with Marbodus that they were able to construe as a victory, awarding both Tiberius and his subordinate Saturnius with triumphal honors and a consulship. Immediately, Messalinus was
They're just handing out triumphs.
dispatched with half of the 20th Legion back to Illyricum to begin the suppression of the rebellion. The Illyrians had received advance warning of his approach, and he was intercepted by a certain Bato of the Bruci, one of the larger Pannonian tribes, whom
So another Bato? So there's 2 Batos.
Messalinus managed to defeat with an ambush. Unable to face the Romans in open battle, Bato and the Bruci retreated to modern Fruscagora and joined with Bato of the Dacidiates in the face of Tiberius's approach. Tiberius and Messalinus chose Segestica as their base of operations, but soon found themselves surrounded and under siege by the rebels, only to be relieved by the arrival of the future historian of these events, the quaestor Velleius Paterculus himself. The Romans were able to repulse the assaulting Illyrians and lift the siege, despite being outnumbered, with an army of 20,000 rebels having been routed. Despite recent successes, the approach of winter harried Roman efforts to subdue the rebellion.
Yeah, because you have a bunch of mountains in here too, and it's gonna be difficult to traverse, right?
Opening up the field to the Illyrians. Throughout the winter, they harassed Roman lines and camps, raided east as far as Macedonia, and fought Rhoemetalces at the far edge of Moesia and Thrace. Augustus grew concerned with the situation, having dealt with the Illyrians himself decades before.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with Agrippa.
And turned to conscripting an army as a solution. With his youngest adoptee, Marcus Agrippa, having proven himself a disreputable drunkard and been disinherited, Augustus turned to his only remaining relative, Germanicus Caesar, the son of Drusus. Throughout 6 CE and into early 7 CE, a force of multiple cohortes voluntariorum were drafted from citizens, freedmen, and even manumitted slaves to form an additional army to face the Illyrians. The young Germanicus happily seized the opportunity and marched into Illyricum to alleviate Tiberius.
Okay, so Germanicus, Tiberius, Messalinius, Severus is somewhere. They have a ton of resources for this. This is maybe a little bit worse than I originally thought.
The year 7 CE opened in tumult. While Tiberius had amassed an enormous army, allegedly over 145,000 men, including Roman allies and Drusus's volunteers, the Illyrians had dug in and used their in-depth knowledge of the terrain to keep the Romans on the back foot. The return of Severus, with the assistance of the governor Silvanus and the Thracians of Rhoemetalces, seemed poised to tip the scale in the Romans' favour, but they found themselves surrounded in the mountains due to confusion among the upper-level officers and the failure of their scouting missions. Velleius Paterculus describes their encirclement and the complete routing of Rhoemetalces' Thracian cavalry, as well as all of their auxiliary units, only for the centurions and the rank-and-file legionnaires to pull through and bring an unexpected victory. Severus continued his advance up the Busut River, where he made camp in the Volcaean marshes near modern Vinkovci, only to discover he had been lured into a trap. The Illyrians repulsed the Roman pickets outside the camp and laid siege to his forces, but were unable to break through and were gradually repulsed by the entrenched legionnaires. Learning from their mistakes, Severus and the Romans changed tactics. They broke apart their large army into its smaller contingent cohorts and centuries, spreading out across the region as they advanced, and making it impossible for them to be completely surrounded. While Severus slowly advanced from the east, Tiberius and Messallinus finally made headway out of Segestica, pushing the insurgents to the confluence of the Drava and Sava rivers in the region of the Papuk Hills, before making camp at modern Abresia. Germanicus and his volunteers also pushed deep into central Illyria, attacking and subduing the Mazae, a Pannonian people who lived in the region of modern Banja Luka. As winter set in, Germanicus remained in the heart of Illyria with his men. At the same time, Tiberius left for Ariminium to meet with Augustus as the War of Bato entered its 3rd year.
So they've been in this for 3 years now. It seems that they've made a lot of ground, though. Like, they're obviously not threatening the coast, which you could obviously say that's probably one of the most important places because of the trade. However, you still have this, like, crazy thorn in the side. I don't know how much longer it's going to be, though, before they fall, because they are surrounded. They are outmatched. It's a war of attrition, if anything, for them.
The melting of the winter snows brought opportunity for Germanicus in early 8 CE, as he and his men tore down their camp and began their advance to Splonum, the nearby center of mining and metallurgy in Illyricum. The city was well fortified, with a large number of defenders and stone walls. Germanicus did not have time on his side, and was forced to bring up ballistae and other engines for a direct assault.
Yeah, don't you love, like, the 1st century AD? Because we're not like in, old times anymore. We got all this technology. I don't know, they've had that technology for a while, but just in mass production now.
The Illyrians repulsed him repeatedly, until finally a Germanic cavalryman named Pusio brought down a crenellation with a stone, taking the defender off the wall with it. The sudden casualty spread panic through the Illyrians, who abandoned that section of the wall, creating an opening for the Romans to take the fortress.
It's over.
Ultimately, the defenders surrendered en masse to prevent their execution. The fall of Rhatinium to Germanicus, however, proved to be a gruesome affair in comparison. Outnumbered, the Illyrians set fire to the suburbanus outside the walls in portions and retreated to their citadel. The Romans, thinking they had successfully routed the defenders, were lured into the city and laid siege to the citadel, only to realize too late they were now trapped by the encircling flames. Unable to escape the enemy's missiles, these men were slaughtered or burned to death as
That's horrible, bro. Like, how'd y'all fall for that?
night approached, shortly before the Illyrians themselves were forced to retreat into subterranean rooms to escape the ensuing firestorm. As day approached, Germanicus and his remaining men tromped over the charred remains of the city, capturing the remaining Illyrians and ending the siege.
Okay, so now what's left?
By 8 CE, both sides were suffering from restlessness, with the Roman army bordering on mutiny and low morale in the face.
And that's what they're probably hoping for. They're just hoping for like attrition to wear them down in this case, because there's no way they're going to win an open battle. There's no way they're going to win a long war if morale is kept high on the Roman side.
Face of a stalemate. Needing a change both in strategy and in morale, Tiberius resorted to reorganizing his forces into 3 columns, headed by different commanders, one under Silvanus, one to Marcus Lepidus, and the final one under his own command with Germanicus's volunteers in tow. Now commanding multiple legions and auxiliary units, Germanicus had taken a major step up the cursus honorum. The Illyrians, on the other hand, fared the opposite. Political infighting broke into open conflict between the Dalmatians and the Pannonians, as Bato of the Bruci first killed his co-ruler Pinnes and
you do that time and time.
Then was betrayed by his own people and handed over to Bato of the Desiderates, where he was executed.
So there's one Bato now.
Disunited and even in open war with each other, the Illyrians collapsed in the face of Tiberius's 3-pronged assault. Silvanus's advance into northern Illyricum and southern Pannonia was met without opposition, and the Bruci and other Pannonii surrendered without a fight. Bato and his Desiderates, however, retreated deeper into central Illyria and Dalmatia, drawing the Romans into their own lands.
This almost feels like how Spartacus, like the Spartacus time, the third, wasn't the third? Yeah, I can't really remember if it's the third or if it was the first. I think it was the third servile war, but it feels very similar to that in terms of you got to keep going with morale and so forth, and you're just going to get wore down, and over time it's just going to be a smaller and smaller subgroup that thinks that they can do it, and then eventually they're going to fight to the death and not make it out.
While the Romans had previously been successful in taking the fortresses of the Dalmatae, Bato's fortress of Andretium was unusually well provisioned and nestled in the mountainous crags near Salona, providing a haven for his army which could withstand Roman assault. Tiberius and Germanicus found themselves repulsed over and over, as Bato's men could attack their supply lines and harass any attempts to undermine or scale the walls with missiles of their own. His men knew this was their last stand. The defected Illyrian auxiliary troops feared their mass execution by the Romans, and so coerced the rest of the rebels to fight to the last man, rather than surrender, in spite of rampant disease and hunger. Tiberius once again faced a mutiny by his own men, due to the stymieing of his offensive. Cassius Dio reports that being a disciplinarian, Tiberius carefully decided to draw his whole army up before him to be addressed, where he carefully rebuked accusations and addressed other concerns, but also prepared to lead his men into a renewed assault. Bato was intimidated by this display and pressed for terms, but Tiberius ignored his heralds.
Oh, he wants to win. He wants a full win. He's also got to remember he's trying to impress Augustus even more than he's already had before, because if you can continuously be in Augustus's favor, because Augustus is just trying to create a roster of heirs, is what I'm seeing. So with Germanicus being there now, with Drusus being Drusus's son, there is rhyme and way that you just got to show that you are the best fit for the future reigns.
Led his army against Andretium. Arranged in a quadratum or square, the Romans advanced against the fortress, where they were beset by all manner of missiles, including sling bullets, javelins, arrows, stones, barrels, and other objects that could harry or
anything they can throw at them.
Aim the assaulters. As their momentum slowed, Tiberius sent in reserves, the arrival of which caused the Illyrians to panic as they shut their gates against their own men outside the fortress. Now trapped between the Romans and their walls, the Illyrians faced slaughter and routed, either fleeing into the forest or falling to the Romans. Seeing their compatriots slaughtered before their eyes, the remaining defenders inside Andretium capitulated, albeit Bato himself managed to escape.
Of course he did.
As winter passed into 9 CE, the end of the Bellum Batonianum was finally in sight.
What about Bato?
Germanicus had stayed in Illyria once again over the winter, and opened the campaigning season with a siege against one of the remaining strongholds of Aduba. While seemingly impregnable with its mountaintop position and thick walls, infighting broke out among the defenders and the inhabitants who wished to surrender and avoid execution. a mix of defections to the Romans and mass suicides ensued, resulting in the swift Roman capture of the town and the capitulation of one of the last strongholds of the Illyrian rebels. With news of Ardaba's fate, the rest of the strongholds surrendered, and Germanicus turned operations over to his officer Postumius. Still at large, Bato sought terms from Augustus. At the beginning of the year, he had sent his son, Scuas, as a hostage, with terms for surrender in exchange for a pardon. Tiberius agreed, and Bato surrendered himself to the Romans and was taken before Tiberius, where he surprised them with his complete submission and request for clemency for the remaining rebels in exchange for his own life. Tiberius ordered Bato spared in a moment of diplomatic wisdom, having learned from the events of the Pannonian War before that partially precipitated this revolt.
Okay.
Tiberius was proclaimed imperator by his men along.
There we go. And I know you got to give it to Augustus too, but still, that's pretty good, Tiberius.
Alongside Augustus, who granted him a shared triumph with his commanders Silvanus, Marcus Lepidus, and Germanicus.
Wow.
Bato was ultimately paraded as a human trophy at the head of the column, and the Illyrian Revolt officially had come to an end.
Well, was he let go after that?
Ultimately, the Romans partially went back on their word to Bato, breaking apart the Illyrian confederations of the Bruci and Dacidiates, and selling many other peoples into slavery around the empire, particularly the men of fighting age.
As they do.
Redrawing the lines of local organization would ultimately lead to successful and long-term imperial colonization of Illyria, highlighting Rome's position as a malicious entity to the indigenous people they conquered and ruled. Despite this resounding success for Tiberius and the young Germanicus, things were about to become much worse for Rome. Once again, the province of Germania found itself beset by turmoil, as the leader of the Cherusci, a former Roman officer named Arminius, led a renewed revolt against the Romans. These events would precipitate an event still remembered around the world, the Battle of the Teutoburg Wold, or the Battle of Calcrisa. This would prove to be the ultimate challenge for Augustus, while Germanicus's career would reach new heights. But first, we must explore the career and failure of Rome's capable governor of Germania, Publius Quinctilius Varus. If you don't want to miss that and...
So... So yeah, the Illyrian Revolt. I wish we had more information politically and like grounded in that area, in terms of like why these people revolted. It seems just like they were opportunist. Maybe they were, trying to do as other tribes have tried to do. But Germanicus and Tiberius, it seems like they are... Obviously, Tiberius has favor right now, but Germanicus is a rising star. So it's more or less a competition to just bring home the gold, always. But nevertheless, this was an interesting video to kind of see just like one of those little things that happened in the Roman Empire, early in the Roman Empire, and how, the heirs of the mighty princeps, how they handle that. And Augustus, of course, is sitting pretty up in Rome, just waiting for the triumph to be called home. Great video, as always, guys. Appreciate you guys being here. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out, and bye-bye.